Alright guys, for this video we are going to continue to go to the Discord chat, we are going to continue to go to the video suggestions tab, and we are going to get our videos from here. This video is brought to you by Clanks, who plays under Jayhawks in all of our Flock Patreon leagues. A lot of y'all play with him, and he wants to know the Cook and Mattison situation and how it changes Mattison's value. And now let's get into it.
That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
All right, guys, I'm going to be very transparent, and I'm just going to say right away that I believe Alexander Mattison has league-winning potential, and all the hype for him as of late is completely justified, and he's a guy that we should be going out there and targeting. And if you haven't already, I mean, you're just going to have to pay up and pay the premium with the Dalvin Cook holdout news. I'm guessing that Dalvin Cook is actually going to get a contract extension, so it will make sense to wait out and try to get Alexander Mattison after Dalvin Cook signs his next contract, and that is going to provide you with a cheap buy window for Alexander Mattison, just because we know that Dalvin Cook is not the running back that has been known for staying healthy through entire NFL seasons. But let's get into it, and let me talk about why I believe that Alexander Mattison not only has league-winning potential if Cook is re-signed, but if Alexander Mattison has league-winning potential regardless. So in 2019, the Minnesota Vikings actually rushed the ball more than they passed the ball, which is something that we never see in today's NFL. We see them have 476 rush attempts, which was 5th in the NFL, and 446 pass attempts, which was 30th in the NFL. So this is something that we cannot necessarily expect to transition over to 2020. We know that when we see teams be on these extremes year over year, that's really non-predictable. I mean, how many teams can you list off that have been extremely run heavy or extremely pass heavy without having personnel that screams, this is what we should be doing, regardless of who our head coach is? So now that the Minnesota Vikings are seeing a coaching change going into 2020, I think this is a team that we can expect to regress to the mean. And even if we see them go, say, average with the NFL and with where they stood in 2019, this is going to be a team that we're seeing be 10th in the NFL in rush attempts and 25th in the NFL in pass attempts, just somewhere around there. So regardless of if they regress to the mean or not, this is going to be a run-heavy team, and this is going to be a team that looks to score the ball through rush attempts. So let's look at Dalvin Cook in 2019 and Alexander Mattison in his rookie year. Dalvin Cook averaged 18 attempts a game, 80 rushing yards a game, 4.5 targets a game, and 120 total yards. So Dalvin Cook obviously won people their leagues last offseason. Didn't necessarily win them the title just because he was injured, but you can't necessarily blame Dalvin Cook for that. That's just a random part of fantasy football variance, and we can look at Dalvin Cook being extremely productive throughout the entire 2019 season, and not only attribute this to the situation in Minnesota, which obviously has a very big impact on any kind of running back production, but also we can kind of chalk it up to Dalvin Cook being a fantastic NFL running back. I'm not here arguing about Dalvin Cook's talent. You can easily tell me that Dalvin Cook is a top 5 running back in the NFL in terms of pure rushing talent, and I'm not going to argue with you. It's not my job to try to determine who the most talented running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks are, just because anybody who is doing that is lying to you, and anybody who is doing that really is out of their own water unless they are associated with an NFL team, have been before, and have been successful. I'm not going to believe you. If you sit there and you tell me you watched the tape, you grinded out and saw Dalvin Cook's juke move and it was 3rd best in the NFL. I mean, to me, you're just an accountant. You're just a guy who has too much time on his hands. And really, I'm not going to put no stock into what you're saying. Regardless, I think it's easier to evaluate the situations. It's easier to project the players and their opportunities rather than it is sitting here arguing about pointless things as if someone's talent really matters at the end of the day or not, because regardless of what anybody says on here, it's not going to change the fact of how many fantasy points he's going to score. And Alexander Mattison in 2019 was the clear RB2 behind Dalvin Cook, which is the most important thing to look at. I mean, I just went on a ramble about a minute saying we can't kind of gauge these guys' talents, but we can gauge how their NFL teams decide to use them. We can gauge how the NFL tends to trend towards historical means. And Alexander Mattison averaged about 8 rush attempts a game, 35 yards, almost a target a game, and 41 total yards. So this is not necessarily extremely impressive for Alexander Mattison if you look at these raw numbers, but if you put into context that he was behind one of the NFL's heaviest used workhorses in 2019, you kind of get a context of saying, okay, Alexander Mattison was good enough to get on the field. He earned the trust of the coaching staff, and they were able to spell Dalvin Cook with Alexander Mattison and only with Alexander Mattison in 2019, despite this being his rookie season and his first year on the team. If we zoom out and look at Alexander Mattison's prospect profile, he's 22 years old, 5'11", 221 pounds, which puts him in the 65th percentile for BMI. Now, this is something that's not necessarily ideal, but it is a big enough running back that can handle a workload if he gets it. Now, the team selected him in the third round with the 38th pick in the third round. So decent draft capital. He barely makes that day 2 cutoff, where we know that running backs after day 2 tend to really not be of NFL use throughout their entire careers. But Alexander Mattison, an important thing to look at is even though he did not necessarily get the receiving production his rookie year in Minnesota, he actually had 27 receptions in 13 games in his junior year at Boise State. So we know that Alexander Mattison is a guy that has a decent athletic profile. He's young, he has the size, and he can catch the ball. The one thing we are lacking with this Alexander Mattison profile to try to determine if he has the capability of taking this Dalvin Cook workload if anything happens to Dalvin Cook is the 2 games we saw Dalvin Cook miss in 2019. Alexander Mattison himself was actually out. So we are unable to see what an Alexander Mattison workload would look like without Dalvin Cook in the game. But throughout the entire season, when they were both healthy, we see that Alexander Mattison is the clear number 2 on this team. I mean, weeks 1 through 15, so a massive sample size, we actually see the RB3 on the team in terms of points per game be CJ Ham. Yeah, I mean, and he was averaging 2.5 points per game. So is this a guy that you really expect to be in a committee with Alexander Mattison? Now, I know another name that a lot of people are bringing up is preseason star Mike Boone, who disappointed a lot of fantasy owners in fantasy championships, including myself. I had him on a couple rosters that were just sitting there at the back end. And I went, hey, might as well throw him in the flex. He's slated in to be running behind a fantastic offensive line, and he's going to be the starting running back. Obviously, that did not work out. And obviously, not too many people are excited about him going into 2020 for good reason. Now, if we try to project Mattison's workload going into 2020, just if anything happens to Dalvin Cook, because I'll be here saying right away, yes, I understand that I'm saying Alexander Mattison is a good buy in both dynasty and redraft right now. But I'm not necessarily saying he's a good buy just because you're going to be able to start him with Dalvin Cook in the game. Maybe if you're really suffering on bye weeks, if you're really suffering throughout injuries, in, say, week 8 of this season, and Dalvin Cook is still the starting running back for the Minnesota Vikings, yeah, sure, you can throw in Alexander Mattison and expect to get 6 PPR points, but that's not what we're buying him for. We're buying him for his ceiling. I say this all the time. We're not playing to get 4th in our fantasy league. We're playing to get 1st, and 7.5% of y'all are going to get 1st in your fantasy league, and really, with that number, you're just trying to get to that ceiling. You're trying to be one of the teams in the league that has the highest possible outcome. And I believe that Alexander Mattison at his current price is going to provide that. So say anything happens to Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison slides into this clear RB1 position on the Minnesota Vikings. Mike Boone may be the RB2, Amir Abdullah may be the RB2, but they are not going to really be cutting into Alexander Mattison's workload, so it doesn't even really make sense to talk about. So say he gets this workload, and say, yes, I'm not going to be here saying that Alexander Mattison is the same talent as Dalvin Cook or going to be able to produce what Dalvin Cook can on a touch-by-touch basis, but I will confidently say that the running back position is mainly determined by situation and not necessarily by talent. So even if Alexander Mattison is only, say, 85% as talented as Dalvin Cook, which in my opinion, I mean, who's to say and why would it matter? But anyway, Alexander Mattison, if we regress Dalvin Cook's points per game by 15% in 2019 to try to project what Alexander Mattison would be able to accumulate in 2020. This would be looking at 18.4 points per game. This would be good for the RB8 in 2019 in terms of points per game. And if this happens, say he hits his 90th percentile outcome, Dalvin Cook is traded. Dalvin Cook actually holds out, which is going to be hard with the new CBA that the players have signed this offseason. It doesn't matter. Alexander Mattison is going to be coming off of a running back 1 season. He's going to be on his rookie contract, and he is going to be gold in Dynasty. It's extremely similar to the James Conner parallel that we saw with Le'Veon Bell holding out in Pittsburgh. Maybe we even see Dalvin Cook get traded before the season, and the Minnesota Vikings say, hey, we're good. We don't need to pay Dalvin Cook. We're already paying Kirk Cousins a ton of money. We're just going to roll out there with our 3rd round pick, Alexander Mattison, and see what happens. So go out there, buy Alexander Mattison. I believe I tweeted out a couple offers that I made where I held Alexander Mattison. Those leagues were a little different. They were best ball leagues, so I was more willing to move him for wide receivers. And I kind of learned that his price isn't exactly where I thought it would be. I offered him straight up for Mecole Hardman in a best ball league, which, first off, I would never do in a regular league. But I determined that, hey, I think that this guy's going to understand Alexander Mattison's upside, and I'm going to take the wide receiver here just because of the format. And he was savvy. He did not trade the wide receiver. But what this also told me is, hey, I don't think as many people are as high on Alexander Mattison as I am with this Dalvin Cook news, and even if Dalvin Cook comes back from extension. So what I'm going to advise is don't go out there and buy Alexander Mattison right now. His price is going to be higher than it is when Dalvin Cook re-signs. But as soon as Dalvin Cook re-signs, this is a running back that has a history of injuries. Go out there and go trade for Alexander Mattison. Now, that's all I got for y'all. I want y'all to have a great day. And yeah, make sure you subscribe.